world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the Podcast. And amazingly, it's been almost a week at the time of recording since the transfer window closed, just an hour before kick-off last Monday ahead of a convincing 3-0 win against Burnley. But because everyone is taking a breath after the window closed, we thought it was a good time to get some expert analysis on what happened across the board, as well as the business Sunderland got done. So who better to join us than today's guest? Because not only is he a good friend of the podcast and good value in terms of talent contests judged by footballers, but he also covers European football for Sky Sports and is a massive lads fan, because today we're very pleased once again to have Dougie Critchley with us. Hello, Dougie.
Hey, Chris. Great to be back on. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. It was a great Monday, actually, in the end for Sunderland, in more ways than one, but particularly that Burnley result felt absolutely massive after the slight embarrassment of that performance against West Ham to get back to winning ways, and an unbelievable goal from Talby as well. February goal of the month has got off to an absolute flyer, and that I might think is winning at the moment, although Kevin versus Man United and that Solanke goal versus Man City, there's been some real high-quality strikes already.
Yeah, it feels like Talby's really getting his Sunderland career started at the moment, coming back from AFCON like that. But yeah, I'm assuming that you're relieved that the transfer window's closed.
Yes, I think so. Although, to be honest, making content for Sky in January was a little bit more challenging than it has been in the last few transfer windows, because there wasn't that much happening. I think Man United and Chelsea changing managers meant that they were probably unlikely to dive into the market in the way that many people might have expected, especially with the Michael Carrick situation at Man United. Are they going to back him too strongly when they don't know who's going to be their permanent boss? And then Arsenal did so much business in the summer. They looked pretty settled. Man City, Crystal Palace, Wolves, West Ham, these were the clubs that were sort of generating most of the headlines, let's say. And clubs like Newcastle and Spurs were quieter than expected as well. So yeah, it was a relatively quiet window, but still some interesting moves that went on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to ask you off the bat, because about that Burnley game, because the transfer window closed an hour before that game. And I've had a bit of a conspiracy theory going that that's why it was Burnley against Sunderland on the TV, because I can imagine Pep and the likes of Arteta having something to say if they had a game an hour after the window closed.
Yeah, it's probably a fair point. I think the fixtures are decided. There's at least, I think there's about a month or so before the actual timings of who's playing which month, maybe even earlier than that, or who's playing when in which weekend, I should say, or across the weekend. But yeah, I don't think it would have suited a lot of clubs that were planning a lot of transfer business late on. But then maybe it became quite obvious that it was going to be a relatively quiet January as well. I mean, the Premier League clubs spent more than the rest of Europe combined across the summer, of which we were a key part of as well. But Sunderland's business, I mean, we'll get into it, but it's aged spectacularly across the season. It's been brilliant.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into some of that because, but just on your point there, the transfer window in general, because obviously, look, you know, the summer's huge. 3.1 billion was spent in the summer, and we had something like, I think it was just under 400 million spent in this January transfer window. On deadline day, not a single transfer was confirmed by a Premier League club until 4 minutes past 7, I think it was. And there's been a lot written in the media about the fact that it was a strange window. But how different was this January compared to previous ones?
I mean, we've had deals like Aubameyang joining Arsenal on deadline day quite a few years ago now. We've had that Enzo Fernandez January as well, coming after the Qatar World Cup, where he joined Chelsea on deadline day. So it's not always the case, but I think it was just the combination of factors, as I've already mentioned, a few teams changing manager, quite a few clubs spending well beyond their means potentially in the summer, and they're bringing in new financial regulations for next year where I haven't got it exactly to hand, but it's basically on your cost of your squad versus your revenue. So it's not across 3 years, which it currently is, where you can't lose more than £110 million for financial fair play. It's much more based on the cost of your squad in terms of wages versus your club's turnover. So clubs like Aston Villa in the past, who have had over 90% wage to turnover ratio, they will need to tighten their books quite considerably. For Sunderland, it should actually be absolutely fine, because this was our first summer, obviously, of spending large amounts, and actually the age bracket of players that we signed as well. I think so many players, like your Roofs, like your Siddiquis, etc., they wouldn't have come in on massive money, I would have thought, against the rest of the Premier League, as it is. So I think Sunderland's, they would have known this was coming. They'd have known that these new regulations were coming in. They'd have known they needed to fall within the guidelines. And hopefully it won't affect our transfer business too much going forward.
Yeah, that's it. Well, looking at the kind of routine of January, because I think it feels like clubs are getting into almost a pattern where, January isn't a time to strengthen. I mean, obviously Man City might be the outlier for the rest of the season, but even if you look at Arsenal, that they haven't spent anything in this window, and they could potentially be going for 4 competitions, last 16 of the Champions League Cup final, 4th round of the FA Cup, top of the Premier League, and they've spent nothing. Do you think clubs are getting scared of actually spending money in January?
Potentially. I mean, these clubs are so good now, and there's such a financial advantage against the rest of Europe as well, that the one time that these clubs around the rest of Europe can really dig their heels in and say, no, you're not getting our best player right now, is probably in January, when when players and their agents are less likely to push for moves as well, because it's so disruptive, moving countries, moving to a new city, moving to a new environment, getting to know a new manager without any pre-season, without any time to bed in, when the games are coming every 3-4 days in the case of these Champions League clubs for pretty much the rest of the season now. So I think it's probably a result of just a little bit more power given to the clubs around Europe, that these clubs will be targeting their players, and just the difficulty of moving in January. We saw Aaron Anselmino, who plays for Chelsea, who was on loan at Dortmund. He got recalled from Dortmund. He was in tears because he didn't want to leave Dortmund, but that's what happens with a loanee, especially a Chelsea loanee. They don't really have any power. And he was sent to Strasbourg in mid-January, and he didn't want to go to Strasbourg. So he's dropped from a Champions League club to a club playing in the Conference League in a new country, when he's still, I think he's in his teens or maybe early 20s. That's incredibly disruptive. So I think so many players are quite reluctant to make these huge moves in January, which is why Mark Gehi and Semenyo, the two sort of biggest deals, at least in terms of headlines, in January, given the fact they were coming from English clubs, given the fact that it was a clear upgrade from Crystal Palace and Bournemouth, and wasn't as disruptive because they already were in the UK. Those were the deals that were done.
Yeah. Just very quickly, because you touched on it there, there's been a lot written about that relationship between Chelsea and Strasbourg. I mean, do you think there's going to be enough of a backlash where this becomes less of a thing, or do you think actually we'll end up seeing more of this in football?
Yeah, sadly, I think the cat's out of the bag now. I mean, it's not just Chelsea and Strasbourg, obviously. There's the Man City football group. Man United are tied to Nice because of Sir Jim Ratcliffe. The Red Bull group have got clubs all over the world. They're not the first club to take advantage of multi-club ownership, but there was actually an overlap fan debate earlier this week, and I didn't actually watch all of it, but they had a journalist from the Financial Times come on and say that it's gone from, I think it was 60 clubs were part of multi-club ownership 10 years ago to over 300 now. So it's just everywhere. But from Strasbourg's perspective, I mean, Chelsea haven't done anything wrong. It's all been legal. They bought the club and they're entitled to buy the club. But from Strasbourg's perspective, if Sunderland got bought by PSG, and yes, we got some PSG youngsters coming to us every year, but if we had our manager, if we had Labrie leaving Sunderland mid-January to go to join PSG, and this natural pathway of just, yes, we'll get these low knees, but any player that plays well for us, Enzo Lefebvre or Siddiqui or whatever, in the summer, they're just guaranteed to join PSG. Can you imagine the uproar at the Stadium of Light if we were just being used as sort of pawn by PSG? So from Strasbourg's perspective, being sort of bullied, or not bullied, but having very little control over their own future because Chelsea are running them, you can see why their fans are up in arms. And this is a proud club that were in the 5th tier in the early parts of the 21st century, got back up to the 1st tier. And yes, Chelsea have given them a number of opportunities in terms of financial investment, but how much is that worth it for their lack of independence?
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on in the years to come. But just back on the window, because we've already touched on that, Man City went big. Bournemouth, I think, spent about 40 million of that Semenyo money. Palace, I think, spent something like 80 million in a very strange month for them. Spurs went big on Conor Gallagher. West Ham, in their position, ended up spending about 50 million on a couple of strikers. I mean, we'll come on to Sunderland, obviously, in a minute, but was there anything that stood out for you where you thought, you looked at a club in the Premier League and you thought, actually, I think they've had a good window?
I think Man City's the obvious answer because they've signed 2 ready-made players that instantly up the level of that first team. And you saw their difficulties in the Champions League, particularly in the last couple of weeks when Semenyo and Gehi weren't eligible to play in the latter stages of the group phase. They'll make a massive difference to their pursuit for a Champions League title this year. I think there's a decent chance that Man City go quite deep in the Champions League, might not have enough in the Premier League against this Arsenal side that gives so little away. But I think that the additions of Semenyo and Gehi in particular, given the fact that Diaz and Gvardiol are out fairly long term, although Diaz actually I think is expected back in the next couple of weeks, but the futures of Stones and Ake, for Gehi to slot in there. And also going forward, if Gvardiol can shift to left back and then you've got Gehi, Diaz at centre back, a new right back, I imagine that will sign in the summer, playing in front of Donnarumma. That's quite ominous going forward. In terms of other clubs that had a decent January, I think Fulham getting Oscar Bob off Man City, I think that's a really nice addition for them as well. It was a player that I thought Sunderland could maybe have a look at as well, because I feel like right wing's maybe the weakest area of our starting 11. I thought we could maybe have a look at him. I think Bournemouth getting Ryan in to replace Antoine Semenyo. Ryan's really, really highly rated. Who got an assist on his debut as well. Looks so physically ready for the Premier League. I thought that was pretty exciting. In terms of other clubs that had a decent January, I think West Ham really rolled the dice with Tati Castellanos and Gil Vicente as well. Tati Castellanos didn't have a brilliant goal-scoring record at Lazio, but is definitely a sort of player that you can build around in terms of the physical attributes that he's got and the sort of intensity that he plays at as well. So maybe that'll give West Ham a chance, but having been 2-0 up against Chelsea last weekend and played so well for 50 minutes to then lose that game 3-2 and then Forest pick up a point, it just feels like even on a weekend which goes almost perfectly for West Ham, off the back of that comfortable win against us as well, they're still right in that mire. So lots of work to do for West Ham. But it was the kind of window where, aside from Man City, I don't think any club would have said, they've had their best window in years or anything. It was just a few clubs making a couple of additions.
Yeah. Well, just quickly on the continent, Dougie, I mean, looking at the European leagues, I mean, a couple of things. Do they have a similar outlook on the January window as the Premier League? Because 400 million's been spent, and we think that's not very much. We think that's a quiet one. But the other thing is, based on that spending power of the Premier League, how do the other leagues view that? Because Sunderland are probably a good example in that. Actually, they can probably outspend quite a few established European clubs by just getting promoted to the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our spend in the summer was, 8th in the world, which is pretty crazy. So that does just show the financial power of the Premier League. It's a pretty unfair. I mean, I'm not complaining too much because it means that we get a better product and we get better players coming to these shores and we watch them on a week-to-week basis. But it's pretty unfair in terms of against the rest of Europe. Clubs like Bournemouth and West Ham, etc., far outspending, these European giants of Real Madrid and AC Milan in the last few years. It doesn't feel quite right, but all things are cyclical. Hopefully they can bounce back. But I think they basically view it as, something that is very, very difficult to contend with. That's why so many clubs, particularly Barcelona, Juventus and Real Madrid, were keen to create the Super League. And you see the results in the Champions League this year. You see Spurs that have struggled so much in the Premier League this year finishing fourth in the Champions League. You see 5 of our 6 sides automatically qualifying into the top 8 and going through to the last 16. It feels like a bit of a throwback to that sort of 2005 to 2009 period where we will get some all-English ties in the Champions League in the latter stages because they just do have such a financial advantage, much deeper squads across 2 legs. I do think that often tells. And you see the kind of the stylistic differences between the Champions League and the Premier League. The Premier League, I don't think in many cases has been a brilliant watch this year. And it feels like Arteta and a more physically dominant and set-piece style is become the preeminent style in the Premier League, moving away from Pep Guardiola's more previous tiki-taka style, where even him in the last few years with the additions of like a Reinders or even like a Semenyo this month, seems to be moving into more physically dominant players as well, and players that can play in transition and play in different ways as well. But in the Champions League, it feels like that physical power that the Premier League has and the fact that they're a little bit more prepared to go for it because they want to qualify for the knockouts as well, meant far more open games and a far better spectacle, let's say. But with those deeper Champions League squads that the Premier League have and there's so much quality off the bench, I do think it would be a case where I'd be surprised if there wasn't at least 2 English sides in the semi-finals of the Champions League. And you'd expect Aston Villa probably to be favourites for the Europa League title as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of Sunderland fans, of course, probably felt it was a shame that one of those clubs had to go through a playoff. But anyway, let's leave that one there. But before we get into what business Sunderland have done, I think we'll take a quick break. So we'll be back very soon.
Adobe Acrobat Studio, so brand new. Show me all the things PDFs can do. Do your work with ease and speed. PDF Spaces is all you need. Do hours of research in an instant with key insights from an AI assistant. Pick a template with a click. Now your prezzo looks super slick. Close that deal? Yeah, you won. Do that, doing that, did that, done. Now you can do that with Acrobat. Now you can do that with the all-new Acrobat. It's time to do your best work with the all-new Adobe Acrobat Studio.
And welcome back to How We're the Podcast. And we're just about to get into looking at Sunderland's business. And first, I want to talk about the outgoings first, because I'm going to group Dan Neil and Anthony Patterson together because 2 local lads who played big parts in taking us up to the Premier League, of course. And they've had moves to the Championships. And it feels like the club are trying to be fair to those players, to give them game time, especially, what they did for us. But there were rumours Dan Neil had a chance to move to potentially Germany. There was rumours he was going to go to Rangers. But do you think that the moves to the Championships have been sensible ones for those 2?
I think so. I agree with you. I think it's nice that the club has recognised that these players had an amazing impact in Sunderland's rise up to the Premier League, weren't playing a lot in January. We could have easily kept them and just filled out our squad in case of a massive emergency, medical crises, let's say. But Anthony Patterson, I think there was always doubts about whether he was quite Premier League level just yet. But it shouldn't be forgotten, his impact, particularly in that final against Sheffield United and that save early doors. Sunderland wouldn't be here without players like Anthony Patterson and Dan Neil. And Dan Neil played, I think it was all but 8 games of Sunderland's 3 championship seasons prior to leaving. So just a phenomenal championship impact for the club, getting us into the playoffs twice. That Michael Beale season, worth forgetting as quickly as possible. But, playoffs twice in having never played in that championship level beforehand. And a move to Ipswich makes a lot of sense, given the fact it's a loan. It's sadly the end of his time as a Sunderland player as well. But again, I thought that was quite respectful because Sunderland could have easily said, we need a fee for this player or a considerable fee for this player because he is still under contract for the next 6 months. So to allow him leave on loan feels like a kind of gentleman's agreement's been made with him and his agent, which is nice to see. And Ipswich is a really good landing spot for them as well. I actually went to an FA Cup game at Portman Road just after Christmas against Blackpool. And Blackpool were in League One, but Ipswich looked brilliant. There was a great connection between the crowd and the players. Jack Clark was playing as well. It was nice to see. He was playing as a number 10. He looked really good, although I was speaking to my mate that I went with, who's an Ipswich fan, and he said he's sort of in and out of that starting 11, but has made a decent impact this season. And Jayden Philogene on the left-hand side, he used to play for Aston Villa. They've got Ashley Young. So there's a decent chance that Ipswich get into the top 2 and get back into the Premier League. And some of the Ipswich fans that I was speaking to have mixed emotions about being back in the Premier League. I think it's one of those situations where sometimes Championship fans prefer to be the big dog in the smaller, or the big fish in the smaller pond, because they didn't have that much fun in the Premier League last year, but maybe they'd be better set. And then for Anthony Patterson to go to Millwall, I think is a solid move for him as well. Millwall have been far, far better in the last couple of years than they had in the previous 5-6, where they felt sort of marooned permanently in the mid to lower table of the Championship. But they're looking upwards too. So hopefully both those players have solid end to the seasons once they get up to full match fitness.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say about Sunderland, we've paved the way for clubs like Ipswich. Surely they just copy. We've done the blueprints and how to do it. But a couple of other moves that I thought were quite interesting to the continent as well. Adil Oshish, of course, moved to Schalke, which I think surprised a few people because he was up in Aberdeen, their topper, Bundesliga 2, which is interesting. Other moves, Arthur Masuaku went to Lens on loan. And one that we were initially excited about, Timothy Pembele, moved to Le Havre on loan during the window as well. I think a lot of people forgot about him. But a lot of players, it's almost like, Gav put it the other day, like trimming the fat during January. And for all those players, it just didn't work out at Sunderland.
Yeah, we had a massive squad in the first half of this season as well, because I don't think we managed to offload players as we probably hoped or maybe expected to right up to the deadline as well. There was always that risk of, will they be, able to force themselves, or not risk, but benefit of, or will they be able to force themselves into the Premier League squad and get into contention? None of them really did. Arthur Masuaku, we'll talk about another player that came in that left, I'm sure, in a Dingerer as well, but Masuaku is probably one of our weaker summer additions, I should say, is probably a sign that they're going to extend Dennis Sirkin and that he's a more, it feels like more of a long-term option as backup to Ronaldo. Ronaldo's obviously into his 30s as well. He had a really poor game against West Ham, but aside from that, I think Ronaldo's been pretty excellent this season. So it feels like we've got two good options at left back there now. And then the likes of Pembele as well. I think we all maybe got a little bit carried away by his name. It did sound like just the ideal footballer's name, but never really got going at Sunderland at all. And Ashish I liked as a player, but probably didn't have the physical attributes. He was always quite technical, but not necessarily the most dynamic. And Schalke is a good landing spot for him. Massive club, historically the third biggest club in Germany as well, but they've just had really difficult times for a long, long time now. But Edin Dzeko signed there on a free in January as well after struggling for minutes at Fiorentina. So for them to strengthen with a player in Dzeko and Ashish that are comfortable at that level, I think will make all the difference in their efforts to return to the Bundesliga.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned him there. Let's move on to Simon Adingra because I think he had a lot of chances to try and stake a claim for a regular place in the side. I think actually, if you look at the start of the season, I think Labris really wanted to play him and wanted to get him in the side, but he never really seemed to take advantage of any opportunity he had. And when January came, it seemed like the club were moving quickly and pushing potentially all month, even though he was getting those chances. And eventually he went out on loan to Monaco, which looked like a good move for him. But were you surprised at how quickly it looked like Sunderland made their mind up about him?
Yeah, I think there was quite a lot of speculation about Romain Mundle potentially joining Rangers as well. So it felt like we were going to offload one of the left wingers. And it did seem like quite a sort of quick decision from the club. But then I can see the benefit of, if he has 6 months at Monaco, I think we'd be better placed to recoup more of the, 21 million pounds we spent on him in the summer. Say if we could get 12, 13, 14 million pounds, that's not a disastrous financial loss, given the fact that so many of the players that we did sign in the summer, his value has probably tripled since playing for the club, particularly players like Siddiqui and Roofs, etc., given the fact they were signed for relatively cheap. If we were, which I hope we don't, but if we were to sell any of them this summer, we could have a massive windfall on that. So if Adingra plays well at Monaco, which I think he's got a decent chance of being fairly decent option for them, when there's speculation around a number of their players leaving, and Ansu Fati's playing on the left-hand side there at the moment, and he's very injury prone. If we could get a decent fee for Adingra in the summer and just chalk it off as the kind of one we got wrong, probably worth still taking a punt on him, given the fact he played so well for Brighton in his first year in the Premier League and was being linked with the likes of Liverpool. His second year, I do remember when he signed, and we maybe even talked about it in the summer on the podcast. So many Brighton fans told me, just be careful with this one. Like, don't get too overexcited. He's very, fits and starts. And ultimately, I just thought he just lacked so much confidence, and looked a little bit lightweight as well. And you saw when Mundell came back into the side, and it took him a few weeks, given the fact he'd been out for so long as well, but instantly looked way more decisive, looked like he was more capable of, beating a man, making some space, getting some shots off than Adingra. And yeah, I think of the, 15 players we signed, probably the worst addition so far. So if we could recoup half to 75% of the fee that we spent on it, I think that wouldn't be a disaster.
Yeah, I think the recruitment team have got more than enough credit in the bank to be fair for that one. But lead us on to incomings. And if you ask most fans what position we thought we might need to strengthen, it was probably those wide attacking positions. And we moved late for Nilson Angulo from Anderlecht for 17.5 million. Young lad, 22, I think he is, signed on a 4-year deal with an option of another year. And it does surprise me how much we're getting used to spending £20 million on a player. It's just a shrug of the shoulders now. But from everything we're hearing, it sounds like he's one to maybe get excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to hold my hands up. This is not a player that I knew anything about prior to Monday, but the people that do know a lot about him and that watch a lot more Belgian football than I do, and this account called Scouted Football, which have a really deep and broad knowledge of emerging players coming through all across Europe and the world, they rate Angulo very highly. So that's exciting for me. I'll go off the recommendations of people that have seen him in greater detail. But his statistics in the Belgian league were really, really exciting. I think he was first for dribbles completed in the Belgian league so far this season, 6th for chances created, and his highlight package, he looks really, really dynamic. Lebris has already come out and said that he's going to add a lot of flair to this side. And given the fact that he's replacing Adingra, who offered, I don't mean to be harsh on the guy, but comparatively little, there's actually not, it feels like there's so much upside in this potential deal. Like he's not even necessarily, has to start week in, week out, especially with the way that Talby's playing on that left-hand side, or played on Monday. We'll have Bertrand Traoré back before too long. Enzo Lefebvre can play on the left-hand side, although I don't think I'd want to see him ideally move from that central position, because Enzo Lefebvre, after I think August and September was a bit so-so for him, but since about October time, he's been absolutely superb. And I don't think he's got enough credit. And to be honest, I'm perfectly happy that he hasn't got enough credit around the rest of the Premier League, because I don't want anyone snapping him up in the summer. But he's been unbelievable, alongside, the likes of Mukiele and Xhaka and Siddiqui, of course, and Roofs. Just another one of those summer signings, although, of course, he arrived on loan the previous January, who's just really grown into this season. So Angulo, best of luck to him. I'm really looking forward to watching him play. I'm looking forward to learning more about him as well in the coming weeks as well. And hopefully he can get eased in over the next couple of weekends and maybe given a full run out by sort of later this month, late February.
Yeah, it's going to be a good talking point when Xhaka comes back and how Lefebvre fits into that and where he plays. But that's a different story, because we did sign another wide player, Jocelyn Tarby from Maccabi Netanya, for around 3 million. And it was really difficult to find anything out about this player other than Celtic were really pushing to get his signature before Sunderland made a move. I mean, is this one maybe just more of a taking a punt on someone with a bit of potential?
Yeah, I think that's the case. Very raw, very young, hasn't been playing at a particularly high level over the last couple of years as well. But yeah, worth a risk. £3 million is really nothing, in Premier League terms at least. I do find it interesting that, a few years ago, Celtic and Rangers felt miles above us in the transfer market. They felt miles above us in terms of clubs. But now you've got Sunderland's lesser played players like Mundell being chased by Rangers. You've got Sunderland moving ahead of Celtic to sign, their targets. And yes, that is Premier League money. That is the Premier League attraction that we can do that as well. But it does feel like, Sunderland's status in British football is just growing week on week. And I think most observers around the UK are realizing that this Sunderland side, I don't want to go too hard too early, but feel like we're here to stay. It doesn't feel like, short of losing multiple players in the summer, which I don't think will be the plan whatsoever, that we can really build on this really solid start to the season as well. Because to be honest, by now I was expecting us to have dropped off slightly and be lower down the table than we were, maybe down to that sort of 12th to 14th area. But at the moment, let's keep it going. Let's see how far we can go. And yes, we'll have the odd shocking display like against West Ham. That'll happen maybe even a couple more times this season. But the way we bounce back from that, with big players missing as well against Burnley, and just took Burnley to the sword and kind of offered them the ball and said, try and create something against this defense. And they couldn't. They couldn't do anything. So it's really, really pleasing. Another summer signing as well that's growing into this side as well. Habib Diarra, well, it felt harsh that it was only one goal on Monday, but sort of I'll call it two. And his impact when he came on against West Ham as well. I'm really excited to see what he can do in the second half of the season after AFCON and injury as well. So things are looking good.
Yeah, absolutely. With Diarra feels like a new signing. Just the last one was Melke Elborg, the goalkeeper, signed from Malmo for around 3 million. Again, what we've heard, he's got a lot of potential, and I think the club are looking to try and kind of coach that out of him, or into him, if you like. But it did mean that we had cover for Patterson, so he could make the move to Millwall. But do you think this is a sign that actually Patterson might have played his last game for Sunderland?
I think so. Yeah, I would have thought so. And yeah, hopefully we get a decent fee for a homegrown academy graduate in the summer, which obviously goes down as pure profit as well. Elborg's wages, wouldn't be wouldn't be significant, given, he's been playing in Sweden. Don't know anything about him, but apparently he profiles very similar to Robin Roofs, and the more Robin Roofs, the better in my mind. So, bring them all in. If Robin's got any siblings that can also play in goal, we can have them as backup too.
Yeah. Just quickly looking at strategy, because looking at the Angulo transfer and obviously Siddiqui, and it does seem like Sunderland are looking around Europe at leagues like the Belgian league, where they think like you're going to get value for money. I mean, I remember way 25 years ago, back on the old Championship Manager, you used to always buy players from Sweden because you bought them for buttons and they were always great. But it does feel like that Sunderland are going out and saying, well, we can get a player for half the price in the Belgian league than in the Premier League, and they're sometimes, in the case of Siddiqui and hopefully Angulo, they're just as good.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at Belgium's success for a comparatively small country, how deep they've gone in a number of major tournaments and how well they've done in World Cups gone past, etc. Belgium are very, very, adept at creating a lot of top talents. And yes, they eventually get plucked by Ligue 1 clubs and then eventually go from Ligue 1 to the rest of Europe. But if we can cut out the middleman and get these players straight from these top academies, and clearly using Chisolfi's contacts books as well, which seems pretty extensive, I think that's really, really exciting. And Lebris obviously, knows the French market, will know the sort of Central European market very well, combined with Christian Speakman and his knowledge of the EFL. It feels like we're quite well covered, because you don't really want to sign the sort of dropouts and the failures that have already been at these top 5 league clubs. You want to sign the next big things because there is so much potential upside in them. And you look at the dynamism in this Sunderland side, despite having, it's the second youngest squad in the Premier League behind Chelsea, despite having a few players in their 30s, like a Xhaka, like a Ronaldo, which just goes to show the kind of age profile that we've targeted. And aside from, there's been the odd player like Mukiele who's been at top clubs, and Brian Brobby has been at top clubs as well. But they either were signed with a point to prove, another opportunity at a top 5 league club and an upwardly mobile club that had arrived in the Premier League. We really did target potential in the summer, and so many of those transfers to come off all in one year so far, really, really impressive. So, if I was wearing a hat, I'd take it off to the Sunderland recruitment team. It's been phenomenal.
Well, that's it. We'll push for time, so I'll just end on this point for you, Dougie, because we'll give everyone a peek behind the curtain in that we're recording this before the Arsenal game. And at this point, we're currently 8th, 5 points behind a Champions League place. We've also got Oxford United, of course, in the 4th round of the FA Cup. But it's quite exciting at this point. It's almost taking a breath before we go into this final stages, because it's got the potential to be a pretty exciting 3 or 4 months, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. Yeah, I'm going to Arsenal this weekend. Obviously feels just a bit like a free hit. I don't think, if we could get a point, that's brilliant. The Burnley result really took the pressure off this weekend as well. So that's fantastic. Hopefully we can have a deep run in the FA Cup. We've got a really good draw in that. There's a number of bigger sides that are playing each other. There's a number of bigger sides that have already been knocked out as well. So I'm just really, really looking forward to the rest of the season. I'm not concerned in the slightest about relegation anymore. It's all about looking upwards. It's all about solidifying a great start to the season, and hopefully just continuing this fantastic work. And maybe a few of our players would be in contention for sort of team of the year. I think Xhaka, Roofs, Mukiele, potentially even Dan Ballard could be in discussion for that. So that just goes to show how phenomenal this season is. And it feels like a dream, but hopefully one that carries on.
Well, that was exactly the answer I was looking for, Dougie, because it's the perfect way to end this podcast. Hopefully we'll hear from you again before the season is over, but it just leaves me to say it's been an absolute pleasure once again, Dougie, and really appreciate the time you take out for us.
No worries. Thanks, Chris.
Good stuff, and hopefully catch up soon. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. Again, we'll have everything covered on the Roker Report website or our daily releases on Howie the Podcast, of course. But from us, it's bye for now.